Well, I want to start with what could be the most important question, which is, did you throw the javelin at Penn State?
I did. Now that is some sleuthing that you did. It was it's a funny story. I was playing baseball at the time. My brother was 4 years ahead of me and a much better athlete. And so when I did track in high school, they put me in all my brother's events, which was probably not going to have a good outcome. And the throws coach said, "Hey, you play baseball, center field, like you should throw the javelin." And so I did work out. And then my brother was actually the reason why I did it at Penn State as well. He had a class with a guy that threw the javelin at Penn State. Not something I ever intended to do or even knew you could. And so it's just kind of a bunch of things that intersected with my brother and him helping me out and do a pretty fun experience.
Good. So
Yeah.
did you make it to like I guess Penn State wasn't in the Big Ten at that
Yeah.
point, were they?
No, they
Oh, they
were.
were.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. 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 So we threw a Big Tens. I placed the Big Tens. Ended up getting hurt. But so didn't accomplish all that I wanted to, but it was still just a pretty unique experience to be an athlete at Penn State, a big Big Ten school to your point. And so you got to know kind of the athletic community there, and it was just a very different but fun experience to have and to remember. Now it's been as you mentioned, it was after Penn State joined the Big Ten, but it was a bit ago.
Yeah, I ran track and cross country in college as well. I went to Illinois State, and it
Okay.
was not Big Ten, but being in Illinois, we competed against a lot of the Big Ten
Yeah.
schools. And coming from Nebraska and then going to Illinois and then competing in the Big Ten, it's like it was a world of difference.
Yeah.
I might have been pretty good in Nebraska, but by the time I got up against some of those other bigger states and bigger schools, it was a little different story. But yeah, lots of learning. So, what did you take away from your time in sports and big time sports like that?
Yeah, I think it's there's so much detail underneath what's something that looks easy. And the javelin, for instance, is a very technical event. And people think, well, you must have had a good arm, but when it comes down to it, it's actually a full body throw. And so taking the time to think through the mechanics and the technical nature of doing something that I think most people would just be like, yeah, I can pick up the javelin and throw it. But it takes a lot of work to do, and I think that really formed the basis of kind of how I approach things in general, which is you always expect there to be something underneath, and some more work to do to really truly learn something and I won't say master it, but get proficient or better than that. And so it was just a very formative event. It also taught me that there's always going to be people better than me. I had a lot of fun. It was a great time to do it at Penn State, but man, there are some super talented people. And no matter how hard I worked, like that talent and their work ethic was going to be hard to compete. So it was a nice humbling experience as well for me.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you talk about the technical aspect of throwing the javelin. I remember watching Al Order throw the discus, and
Yeah.
just you think you just spin around a few times and
Yeah.
you throw this disc and it goes, I don't know, 100 yards or 300 feet or whatever he was throwing it back in the day. And I can picture people doing the javelin. I mean, I've watched people throw the javelin, and I realized, yeah, it's more than just having a strong arm.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the word mastery, and I love the concept of mastery, and I'm interested in, if you have a definition of mastery, how do you think about that? How do you apply the concept of mastery now that you're in the business world, now that you're an executive? How do you think of mastery in terms of the work that you do?
That's a great question. And what comes to mind is I think earlier on in my life, I thought mastery meant like perfection or how to do it the best. Now, as I reflect on it, I think it's more of you're always pushing yourself to get better. And so even if you do achieve a peak or get known for something, being a leader of something, you're never resting. And so mastery of it, as I think of, as this almost organic idea now, where you're always pushing yourself to learn, to evolve. Because if you don't, I think the pace of things will eventually show you that you're no longer a master, right? And so I think there's this element of a level of achievement, an expert level, but then you always need to go beyond that to make sure that you remain, at that level, because that level will, continually move up over time.
Yeah. And I think of mastery as an aspiration as opposed to necessarily a destination. And so I can't come anywhere close to the times that I was running back in high school and college and distance running, but I can do different things and I can continue to try and progress to a newer level at the new thing that I can do at my age. And so that's what continues to get me excited about trying to be active and moving and engaging in sports these days, is just trying to find, well, what can I do and can I do it a little bit better? And to me, that keeps me motivated.
Yeah, I think we're both pointed to this idea of there's always something more, right? And not, resting on your laurels, so to speak, which is like, I have now attained something and I don't need to do anything more. The world's changing. It's, I'm a person that loves to learn and loves to push myself. And so, the individual achievement to me is less interesting than like, where can we go next? I think that plays out in both my personal but also my professional life. Hightower's had quite a bit of success over the years, but it's also an organization that is always pushing itself to change, evolve, grow, and we know, we can't be the same organization tomorrow that we are today. And I think bringing that same perspective to my personal life, I think sometimes is tiring, but it makes for an interesting life. You try things that, a few years ago you wouldn't even have thought about or dreamt about, and it just, keeps things interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue to the first area that I really wanted to touch on, which was organic growth in the industry. Now, you mentioned Hightower. You're the chief growth officer at Hightower. Before we started recording here, I mentioned that I had Elliot Weisbluth on the podcast probably back in about 2015. So back in the early days of this show, when I was talking to Elliot back then, I think Hightower had about 30 billion in assets under management. Today, what are you, 100 billion or so?
We're more. It kind of depends on where the market is on a daily basis, but I call it 120, 130 billion dollars or so of total assets, maybe a bit more than that.
Okay. And so this idea of mastery, this idea of there's always another level, there's always something more. I'm a big believer in that. Okay. And I think you are as well. Yet when we look at the industry and when we look at the data in terms of the organic growth of the advisory, the average advisor out there, they're not growing. And Charles Schwab came out with some data last year, their annual benchmarking report. And I started crunching some of the numbers in there, some of the data that wasn't in there, just to get some analysis. And what I realized was what they did publish was that the revenue growth for advisors over the past 5 years, ending December 31st, 2021, was 11.3% annualized for 5 years. But if you took a 60-40 portfolio and said, well, what if I just held a 60-40 portfolio? That grew 11.9% annualized over those 5 years. So the conclusion you can draw is, the average advisory firm didn't really grow on an organic basis. And the only reason why they were showing top line growth is because of what the markets did. So I'm curious, are you seeing that kind of data? And if so, what are you guys doing at Hightower? How are you thinking about a lack of organic growth? What are you guys doing to help your advisors grow?
Yeah. So we see the same thing. And on the M&A side of Hightower, prior to 2022 and the downturn, anytime we saw a growth rate of 10 to 15% or so, we assumed it was basically net new asset neutral, right? Maybe plus minus either way, but probably indicative of an organization that was not going to be a high, called same store sales or organic growth business. And I think, part of that is what you outlined in the article, which is, there's this early build of a business And then based on the recurring nature of the relationship with the client, the scalability that you get with clients through technology, you get this point of level of income or a level of wealth where the next incremental client isn't going to necessarily impact your wealth or your income dramatically. And so you've really got to be focused on wanting to build a business rather than build, to the point of a lifestyle. And neither one of those paths is wrong, but I think one, the probability of sustained organic growth is a lot higher than where you're trying to achieve some level of income or some level of wealth. And how that translates for us at Hightower is we think about the process of growth. And so, a lot of the firms in the industry were built by a few called principals or rainmakers that were good at going out and getting clients. They eventually had too many clients to serve themselves. They hired people to serve those clients and do things that they didn't necessarily want to do on a daily basis. But then there's a generational shift that has to happen as those principals, get closer to retirement, want to work less. They need the next generation to step up, right? But oftentimes they haven't taken the time to develop that next generation, nor hired the next generation to grow the business, right? But the business will eventually require it in order to become a multi-generational organic growth business. And so what we look to do is, one, identify firms that have thought about developing a next generation, both technically and on the business development front. And then two, we go and diligence and work with them to say, what are and aren't you doing around the process of growth? There are, in our mind, kind of three building blocks of growth. One is, how do you think about and articulate your unique value proposition? And not only the person going out and getting business, but every individual in the business has a role and can articulate the unique value proposition of the business and knows they impact both the experience and the opportunity to get a referral or work with a new client. The second is what I mentioned, the process of growth. And it's, it sounds boring, but do you have a pipeline? Do you have a pipeline management process? Do you speak specifically about leads and how you're going to look to set up a conversion opportunity and add value to those that opportunity? And then do you look to generate referrals from those clients in a very specific way, as well as with your COIs? So it's very process oriented. And I personally believe in process, because when you think about learning new behaviors and building the muscle memory, you have to do them frequently, right? You can't just do one time, master it, as we talked about, and now know how to generate business. It has to become something that you do on a daily basis, right? It's the mechanics of growth. It's the behaviors of growth. And the only way to learn those is do them frequently. And then the last piece that we really focus on is content. And so how do you communicate and talk to clients and prospects in a way that's relevant to them? I think the beginning types of content in this industry were, hey, we're going to write to you about what we think about is going on in the market, right? Stocks are up or down, and that's interesting. I think that is to communicate like a level of expertise, but it's not as relevant to your clients and to your prospects as maybe talking to them about life changes and things like that are more relevant either to their stage of life or to their profession and things like that. And so we have a content team that works to produce customizable content based on the segments that we serve across Hightower. And so we're bringing you in, helping you think very specifically about how you articulate the value of what you do. We're making sure that the process is there so that people can learn and can become trained on it. And we have resources to do that with you and then to train you. And then the last piece is marrying all of those first two things with the content so you can stay in front of your clients and your prospects and be relevant to them in a way that perhaps many others aren't.
So talked about a lot there. So
Yeah,
I'm just gonna ramble here for a minute and see if we can put some structure around what you just described there. So you talked about the original founders of firms. Let's go back 30 years. So some of the names that we all know today, these are folks that have been in the business for 30 years. Back then, it was pretty much a eat what you kill. So I started in this industry in 1993. So I'm in my 30th year of the industry. So I well remember the old commission days. And 80-90% of the people that started in the business back then basically washed out because they couldn't make it. The people who did, though, they could sell. I mean, they knew how to sell. Whereas today, because we've moved to a fee-based asset management model and we have 97%, 98% retention rates, you don't have to sell like you used to. And so when we're talking about generation 2 here, the next generation of leadership, I don't think they've learned how to sell. And I think you were making that point as well. And so it seems to me we've shifted from more of a selling environment to more of a marketing environment. So when you talk about content, when you talk about the unique value proposition, when you talk about the process of growth, to me, a lot of that is it's more marketing as opposed to quote selling. And I think the other thing related to that is that people have to want to grow. And as a result of this 97, 98% retention rate, you start the year, January 1st, with 97, 98% of your revenue pretty much in the bag. Okay.
Yep.
And so with that, it's like there's less pressure to go out and get that new business. And so I think this all really ties together because we started out talking about mastery. And to me, it's like, if you're making $1 million, $2 million, $3 million a year, okay, obviously that's a wonderful living. So then to your point about, well, what's the incremental dollar of new income? To me, it's really not going to do anything for me if I'm making that kind of money. But what is? Yeah. It's like this idea of mastery. It's like, what's the next thing that I can do to grow personally? And so I think we've got to somehow ignite that intrinsic motivation, because the extrinsic motivation of money and accolades, it's only going to get you so far. But at some point, when you've got all that, what's the intrinsic motivation to keep moving forward? And I think that's a missing thing in our business, is that I think I see a lot of people, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but a lot of the younger advisors, they're more focused on how can I work 30 hours a week and make $250,000, $300,000 a year, which is a very nice income, and have a quality of life where I can raise my kids and be with my spouse and just have a really nice life. And again, that's great. There's a market for that. Anyway, let me just stop there and see if you have any reaction to all that.
Yeah. So I think, one of the things you pointed out, especially around the commission, is the idea that your bucket's empty or mostly empty when you walk into the new year versus your bucket's full. And I think the difference is, I think sales is still very important. But when you're in a commission-based environment, it is, what do I sell to get a commission to fill my bucket, right? And so it is very specifically selling a product. Now, because the bucket is filled, you don't have the incentive or the motivation or the need to go out and fill it. And so it becomes more of a consultative sale, right? Because what you're selling is no longer a product, but an experience or a service. And so, I think the idea of sales still is very relevant, and I don't think we should hide from it. And I think sometimes the idea of sales is taken on this negative connotation. And I think, we as an industry, and as people building firms, would really benefit from the idea of sales is good if you're solving a problem for a client or for a prospect, right? If you're helping them achieve something that they wouldn't otherwise do, like, you're adding value to their life. And so wouldn't you want other people to benefit from it? And when you break it down, something along those lines, most advisors will be like, yes, I add value to my client's life. Yes, I think more people would benefit from it. It's like, okay, so like let's go talk about it that way, rather than this idea of, I have a bogey that I must hit. The second thing that you mentioned is kind of the newer advisor. I actually give them more credit than I think most people do, and I think we're setting them up sometimes without like the success of the business and business development in mind. If you recruit somebody that's highly technical and you say all you're going to have to do is serve clients, and then 5 or 10 or 15 years in advance, you're like, no, no, no. Now you have to go out and get clients. Like, you're changing the dynamic, right? You're changing the story on them for something that they weren't brought in for. Like, what I've seen work really well is when you're recruiting people, you talk to them about, we are a growth organization. In order to grow, we all need to be enlisted in finding that next client. You will have goals associated with outgoing, not only going out and getting clients, but the actions associated with getting those clients. So you will be, as part of your daily job, talking to COIs, asking for referrals, and you set it up in a different way so they come in with this idea that, you know, they're part of a growth organization, and a growth organization requires everybody to be involved in growth. And so I think they're actually pretty excited, and I've seen, not everybody, of course, but I've seen a lot of people get really excited about being part of a growth organization, especially when that organization marries the training and development necessary for them to learn what they need to do. Because they may not, or are unlikely to be walking into that industry or that company, you know, ready to go and ready to develop business. But I think they're more than willing to engage and learn about how to do it. They may not become the person that walks into the room and opens everybody up and magically generates clients in an airplane, but they're very willing to talk about the value that they generate with a client, with a COI, with somebody that could be a referral relationship. And that is good enough when you add it all up, and you can be a really healthy organic growth business, and become a multi-generational business.
Yeah, and you made a really important distinction there when you talked about a servicing advisor versus an advisor who's expected to actually bring in new business. And I think as we made that shift from the original generation of advisors who were great salespeople who built the business, and now they've got hundreds of clients and they need another advisor to work with some of those clients. So they bring on an advisor, a quote, servicing advisor. Hey, I got all these extra clients. I want you to take care of them.
Yeah.
And so the advisor's not really learning how to, quote, bring on new business. And I see there's a lot of advisors who like that, who like the idea,
Yeah.
hey, I'm a financial planner, I'm a financial advisor, I love working with clients, but I don't really like trying to drum up business, going to networking events, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so I think there is a role for the servicing advisor for sure. Okay, I don't think there's any doubt about that. But you're right in terms of we still have to have a growth mentality within firms, because growth is the lifeblood of the business. And it's not just growth for growth's sake, but if a business doesn't grow, there's no opportunities for promotion. There's no opportunities for like R&D to reinvest back in the business, to enhance the level of service that you're offering to your clients. So there's good reasons why we do need to have that growth. Another thing that you said that I also want to point out that I think is so spot on is that if you have this unique value proposition, if you 100% believe in what your firm is doing and believe that your firm is the best in the business at what you do, then by all means, you should be jumping over the moon to try and talk to other people, get them engaged to work with your firm, because you know no one else is going to take better care of them than your firm. And so when we talk about selling versus that consultative sale, I mean, I to your point, it's like, it's the latter. It's like, I'm not trying to sell you a product. I'm trying to get you engaged in something that I know is going to benefit you. And I just can't help myself but tell you about it. It's like, if you get that level of excitement, then I think it becomes much easier. And I think that if people realize that's what we're doing, you know, we're getting people happily involved in working with us. It's not, I'm trying to sell you a product because I need to meet a quota. It's a whole different story.
Well, and think about, you know, we're talking about an individual, but if we have a group of individuals that have that same mindset, think about the impact on the culture of the business and the excitement that you can build within the business. And so you transform from, yes, you're a financial planner, but to your point, when you're a growth business, you have opportunities for people. You can recruit new people. You like, all of this goodness comes from growth when it's intentional. And I think, you know, we if there's one thing that I think, you know, in the beginning, the RIA, like the RIA industry, I don't know if they set out to build businesses, right? And build and kind of think through how are we going to become a self-sustaining business beyond me? And what is it going to take? And instead we it was very much kind of a practice that ended up growing into a business, and more recently has become very valuable, as private equity has come into the industry more and more. And so I think about it as, if we step back and say, how would you build a business in this industry? I think we'd have a different perspective on talent development, on recruiting. And you're right, like service advisors are very valuable, but service advisors can also ask for referrals. They work
For sure.
with COIs, right? They work with clients. And if we can get people excited about telling the story, and about talking about the value that they add to people's lives, like that just becomes a nice flywheel that can develop. And then we need to hold each other accountable to doing those things, because sometimes they're uncomfortable, right? Sometimes they're like the next thing on your list that you need to do. And if there's no accountability mechanism within the organization, to reinforce what the organization thinks important, the likelihood of follow through on a continual basis is a lot lower.
So I wrote a blog post a little while ago about this thing that's called the rule of 3 and 10. And this is a concept that's come out of Silicon Valley. And the idea is simply that every 3x or 10x growth in your business, things are going to break, and you're going to have to rethink what you're going to have to do to get that next stage of growth. So if someone gets to, say, 350,000 in revenue, sure, you can do that, with one person, and then you triple it, and now you're at 1 million. And yeah, you can do that with you and maybe 1 or 2 assistants. Well, then to go from 1 million to 3 million in revenue, now you're going to have to build out some staff. Maybe you've got a second advisor in there. Then you go 3 million to 10 million. Okay. That's a whole nother ball game there. Now you're probably looking at having a chief operating officer, chief compliance officer, so on and so forth. So things get complicated every 3x or 10x. And so what I see happening, and I'd love to get your thought on this, is every time you get to one of those key decision points, the business owner, the advisor is asking themselves, okay, do I really want to do what it's going to take to get to that next level? And some of them say, absolutely, I'm in for this. And they do what's necessary. Others say, well, I think I've reached a ceiling here. I'm spending too much time running the business and not meeting with my clients, which is what I love to do. So let me sell to Hightower. Let me sell to Carson. Let me sell to creative planning or merge or whatever, and let someone else handle a lot of the management stuff. And I can get back to what I love to do, which is working with my clients. And then a third option is, I still like my independence. I'm just going to sort of write it out, and yeah, I'll find a successor at some point, but I'm making really good money and we'll just kind of ride this thing out. So with that, one of the things that I say to advisors is, if you have what I'll call a compelling aspiration for your firm, and maybe this gets back a little bit to your unique value proposition, but I think of it as, why do we come to work? You could call it purpose. You can call it your mission. There's different words for it, but maybe an aspiration is the word that I really like to think of. It's like, what do we aspire to as a firm? What do we aspire to as individuals within this firm? And if you can dial in on that, and if that can be motivating and exciting and igniting you to continue to move forward, then I think what you're going to do when you get to those 3x and 10x inflection points becomes much easier to make a decision. So I'd love to hear, for Hightower, do you guys have a compelling aspiration, and how do you think about when people get to those key pivot points, those key decision points, how do they go about making decisions on where they're going to go next?
Yeah. I think you outlined the personas, or the different situations that people find themselves into pretty well. The one thing that I'd say is, oftentimes as the business gets bigger, you pointed out, they get pulled away from business, and they start hiring people to help them run the business, but they're always going to be associated with running the business. And I think that's the thing that people struggle, or a lot of people struggle with, which is, if you built the business, you have to be really intentional to hand off the reins of the business if you truly don't want to run it. Because if you're the one that built it, is bringing in the clients, is seen as the founder, you're always going to have that kind of the aspirational model for a lot of the org. It's like, this is the person that I aspire to be. And so if you're going to bring in the COO, the president, or whatever role, you need to be really intentional about empowering that person. And so then I think what you pointed to also is there's this evolution going on where people are saying, okay, I may not want to run the business and build the business and do all the things required to become fully independent. And so what are my choices, right? We think about it as a spectrum of conformity, where on the one side you have the financial transaction, right? We'll invest in your business, but you'll by and large remain the business. The other side is what we call full conformity, and that's the firms where, okay, you can return fully to being an advisor. You'll take on somebody else's brand, you'll follow their process and procedures, but you return and you can get really close to the client again, because you're not worried about any of the operational aspects of business. It's just client service and maybe some team management or something like that. We think of ourselves as kind of in the middle, and this gets to your question about like, what is our vision? What are we enabling people to do? And so, when we look at a business and what takes time, and is required in the business, but doesn't necessarily impact the client experience on a day-to-day basis, it's a lot of the back and the middle office, so tech, compliance, finance, things like that, where if we can take that off of somebody's plate, we've just created quite a bit of opportunity and time, for the principal or principals selling their business. And we can help them with the teams that I mentioned, kind of around the unique value proposition, the process, and the content. We can help them figure out how to orient that time, to not only grow the business, but develop the next set of people that are going to grow the business. And so we balance this idea of maintaining what I think of as functional autonomy. So if you go on the Hightower website, you'll see firms that are branded Hightower, and you also see firms that aren't. And so they have the autonomy to create their own brand experience, with the backing of somebody like Hightower that can really focus them on people, culture, serving clients, right? And I think where we've taken a big leap, and others have as well in the industry, is we're now also thinking about, okay, we've made you more efficient, we've created more time. How can we help you extend what you do for clients, right? How can we do more for clients within a common experience, where you, the advisor, and the person running this autonomous or functionally autonomous business unit, can pull in the expertise that you need, from one environment. And I think that's where I think you'll see a lot of transformation in this industry. But I think this is also how we can really influence the organic growth of our businesses, which is, if you can get advisors talking about doing more things for their clients, that A, solidifies their relationship with the client, B, it's a referable opportunity for somebody else, and it's also something you can take to COIs and say, hey, this was our unique value proposition. Now, by partnering with Hightower, I can elevate that value proposition by now offering a national trust company, a state and financial planning desk, tax services or bill pay. And I think you're now just elevating the conversation you can have with clients or COIs, which then drives more organic growth.
A lot of the advisors who are independent today, they left a wirehouse because they didn't like the wirehouse environment. They didn't like being employees. They didn't like all the rules and regulations they had to follow by being part of this large company. So they go independent, they build a multi-billion-dollar business, and then they go to work with a Hightower or any of the other firms like yours out there. How do you prevent Hightower from becoming what everyone left, from becoming like the next wirehouse?
Yeah. I think that's where we really shine for people that want to continue building a business and want to envision the next chapter. Because as you pointed out, not everybody does, right? Some people have reached the stage in their professional career, their team is not necessarily the one to take it forward. And so this idea of partnering with somebody where you can hand that off is appealing. I think where Hightower shines is for people that are very focused on continuing to build their business, and recognize, like, yes, we want to build our business, our culture, but we also recognize what's going on in the industry. Like, technology is impacting us more and more each day. It's becoming more complicated. The compliance and regulatory environment impacting us more and more each day, getting more complicated. And so we're going to expend an increasing amount of energy just running the business. So we can find a partner that takes that off of our plate, but lets us continue to determine client service, investment models, brand. I think brand's a great one. It's like, you create your own brand, you create your own experience, you create your own comp model. And so I think what we're preserving is that entrepreneurial opportunity. And then even down into the economic sharing relationship with our firms. For the partners, we're not going in and determining comp. We're sharing in the cash flow of the business. And so I think that's a nice way to say we can be helpful. We can help you think about comp structure for partners. But at the end of the day, it's your decision how you do this. And so I think our structure really aligns for those folks that recognize the competitive landscape on running a business is changing pretty rapidly, like the idea of keeping that autonomy though, and continue to build their brand experience, their business, and want to achieve kind of that multi-generational business, which is becoming real each year as kind of the first generation of leaders, second generation of leaders, and these RIAs is getting closer to retirement. We're now kind of on this precipice of this massive generational shift, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, and as we talk about growing your firm, one of the biggest constraints on that is advisor capacity. It's like every advisor, there's a certain number of clients that they can effectively work with, and at that point, like, hey, I'm full. I can't really take on any more. How do you think about adding advisor capacity as a firm? What is Hightower helping in some way to expand the number of advisors in the business? I think you've talked a little bit about some of the training that you guys do, but how do you think about advisor capacity and expanding that so that we can serve more people?
Yeah, I think at first it comes when you think about these businesses, many people in these businesses have multiple hats, right? And so, the COO will also be the CCO, or the main principal would be the CCO and the CFO. And so I think the first step in that is, relieving them of the obligation to run compliance and tech and the finance environment and HR and things like that. And so we're immediately freeing up time that creates, doesn't necessarily increase their capacity, but it increases their capacity to serve more clients because they're no longer doing that. The second thing that we do, and I think this is, differentiates us as well as other scale players, is we're constantly thinking about the experience that is provided to not only the client, but to the firms that are part of Hightower. And so how can we invest in technology and not just, picking Orion versus Tamarack or eMoney versus MoneyGuide Pro, but how do we feed data back and forth between these programs? How do we surface that data so that somebody's not having to enter in data multiple times or log into multiple pieces of technology to provide an experience? Can we create the experience? And so again, it comes down to, can we make the experience more efficient over time? And then I think there are some things that each individual business has to ask itself too, at least with regards to Hightower, which is a lot of or a number of firms approach customization as the way you add value. And I think we really have to ask ourselves, does that add the value that we think it does? And I ask, particularly investment focused firms that are trying to customize things. It's like, do you know your best ideas? I'm like, yeah. It's like, all right, well, how are your best ideas represented in a massive amount of customization? And so I think we have to be really critical about where we are truly adding value, where things, and there's a difference to me. I'm not saying all portfolios should be the same, but there is a threshold of excellence required to adequately serve a client on the investment side. Do you need to go those final 15 steps to eke out the last piece of value, or should you spend that somewhere else planning, helping multi-generational families plan for the eventual passing of somebody? And like, where are we truly adding value, and where should we go, 80, 90% of the value versus doing everything possible to capture 98, 99, 100% of the value. And then if we accept that there is a very high threshold for what we need to do for things, how can we redeploy that energy and that capacity that we would have done chasing that final little bit into extending our service model, getting that next client? And so a lot of where we engage from a Hightower perspective is helping them think through their business. Like, what processes do they have? What processes don't they have? How are they developing their people? How can we help develop their people? And so we form a strategic plan on an annual basis that focuses on the service model, the growth goals, and the people. And then we engage with them, particularly on the people side. I will engage across it all, but on the people side is kind of back to your question. So we have the Hightower Center for Leadership. It's an 18-month cohort-based program where next generation leaders are learning how to run a business within Hightower. We have an organic growth series hitting on much of what we're talking about, the behaviors that are necessary to generate growth. And again, cohort-based, with the idea that, sure, they can learn from our experience and our expertise, but building out that network for them so that they have people to rely on is invaluable. And it has a way of creating accountability in a very different manner than we can at Hightower, because now you're accountable to people you respect, professionally you respect, that are in the same jobs. And so the more we can build out that network, I think the positive, more positive long-term impact we'll have.
A couple of things you said there that I want to touch on. One is you talked about specialization, and a second, you talked about customization. So on the specialization side, I had a conversation with Rick Edelman one time, and he was saying that their advisors could work with 3 times as many clients as a typical advisory firm. I said, okay, Rick, well, how is that? And he said, because a typical advisory firm, to your point, is only spending maybe 30% of their time dealing with clients, and the other 70% of the time is all the other stuff about a business. He said, our advisors do one thing. They advise. They meet with clients day in, day out. So if they can spend 90% of their time, that's 3x what a typical advisor can do. So I think advisor capacity, again, to your point, specialization, if we can have people that are advisors and that's what we're paying them to do and that's how they spend their time, there's added capacity there. And then to your point about the customization, I think this one's interesting because I think there's a real tension here between we want to personalize our interactions with our clients, we want to customize solutions for them, but then we have to weigh that against the cost of that, the time of that, and what they're paying us to do that, and what the added value is of that. And so I think that's an interesting dynamic that every advisory firm has to figure out. What is the right tension on that rope, so to speak, between the two ends of complete, sameness, let's call it, versus complete personalization. I think technology, of course, we all know, gives us the ability to do a lot of personalization at scale. And I think I want to talk about artificial intelligence here in a moment too, before we wrap up. So I don't know, any thoughts on either one of those that we touched on?
Yeah, I think about it as one thing you said was value we're truly creating, right? And the value of personalization, what does that actually mean? I think to many of our clients, what personalization means is they feel we know their situation. We're creating and making recommendations based on their situation. Not that we have a particular stock in or out of the portfolio, right? And you're right, there are exceptions. Hey, I have a highly concentrated, appreciated stock. Like, we're not going to blow out of that just to put it into our model. And so there are ways to personalize the service that I think technology enables, but requires us to take a step back and say, okay, what was differentiating 2 years, 5 years ago may not be as differentiating anymore. So where is our true value to the client being expressed and delivered? And let's over rotate on that and make sure we're getting as much value out of that while doing other things like in an excellent manner, but in a more common way. And I think it requires us to take a step back and really challenge ourselves to say, what we hold to be true may not be true anymore, or as true. And so again, going back to the idea of building a business, in order to build a multi-generational or like business that's driven by organic growth, you are going to have to evolve constantly. Your service model will continue to extend. And if you just continue to extend it in a highly customized way, there's only massive amounts of complexity and a high number of people that are going to come with that. And so as you extend the value proposition, where can you look at the value proposition and become less customized, more standardized, not commoditized, but more standardized? And I think that's what we have as an industry have a fantastic opportunity to do. And I think it would actually produce better client results. I think it would produce a better client experience if we really challenged ourselves on an ongoing basis to say, what do our clients actually value? What did they value 3 years ago? How's it different than today? What do we think it's going tomorrow? And to be on that kind of evolving, ever-changing, or have that ever-changing perspective, going back to the very beginning of the conversation, this idea of mastery is not a finite place. It's this thing that we're always looking to achieve, always looking to learn and progress. And I think we need to do that as an industry as well.
Yeah, and this is really interesting because as you talk about what is the real value that a financial advisor delivers that clients are actually paying for, is it what the advisor does for the client? Is it what the advisor helps the client feel as a result of working with the advisor, whether it's that quote peace of mind, whether it's I'm confident now that I have enough money to retire, I'm not going to run out of money, that sort of thing. Yep. And I think I hear you saying, let's really optimize on what the client really values the most. And if we can, there's going to be some customization as we've talked about, but if we can focus on really enhancing that value of what they value, we always talk about this is such a relationship business. Okay. I think we would all agree with that. And as we have more of this technology, if we do move toward this idea of we provide a high level of a common set of services and we use technology to augment our ability to deliver that at a very high level without things breaking down, then what's left? Well, what's left is the relationship, the communication that I have between me and my client, and yep, the empathy that I have for their situation and being able to understand what they're going through as they deal with money, which is one of the most personal things that any of us have. So, I think that's another interesting dynamic is, yeah, again, another tension between, delivering the stuff of being a financial advisor versus the intangible of the emotions that clients are feeling as a result of working with me. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that as well.
Well, I think it's very similar to the conversation we had about sales, right? And sales is not inherently a bad thing. Neither is standardization. Standardization actually can be a good thing if we're not only becoming more efficient as a business and freeing up time to spend with our clients, but we're doing it in a consistent way that's probably going to generate better outcomes for our clients than endless customization. Because eventually, we're not going to manage the customization appropriately and something's going to happen. So let's focus on where we really add value, to your point. And let's be honest about okay, where do we think the value proposition or our clients are going to want more of tomorrow? And how are we going to get to that point? We're either going to have to hire new people, take on technology, or change, or a bit of both of that, and change how we do things today. And so I think it's just this idea that we have to look at things that we moved away from. So product sales is a bad thing, but sales then became a bad thing. Sales is not a bad thing. Sales is how we grow businesses. this idea of like, well, now that I'm, free of product sales, I can like customize and create value of that. That may have created value in the past, but like, let's look at that and say, standardization's not bad. How can we make standardization excellent? Right? It doesn't mean everything's done the same way, but how can we raise the bar so that we capture enough value or all of the value for our clients in a standard way? I think it's just more of a mindset shift, more than anything else. I don't think that anything we're talking about is revolutionary or hasn't been talked about before, but I think it is a mindset shift. It is a commitment to growing and building a business, rather than providing a service to a client. And when you look at it that way, you stop looking at your business as like a practice, and you really start to think about what is required to help us, going back to your idea of creating a vision for an organization, help us achieve that vision, that we have an organization that excites our people, that helps us recruit better talent. And guess what? If we have excited people that are highly talented, we're going to create value for our clients. But we can only get there if we create the vision and the excitement that attracts those people.
For years, the industry has been talking about how pricing is going to drop. So instead of the 1% fee or, around there, we're going to start seeing pricing decline. Well, we haven't seen that. And instead, what we've seen is the amount of services that we're delivering for that same fee has gone up. So maybe there's been some erosion in the margins. So I think there's also this idea that advisors feel like, I'm making a lot of money. And so I've got to add more and more services, and I've got to be more personalized to justify, quote, the fee that I'm charging. Do you see any of that with advisors? As we talk about this pull between customization versus standardization, do you see any advisors even unconsciously thinking, well, they're paying me $50,000 a year, I probably should spend a little time customizing their situation? Do you see any of that?
I think it's in the back of their minds. I mean, I think, all these businesses, no matter, like, a small business can provide a great income, a scale business can be quite profitable. So I think that's probably in the back of people's minds. But I think when you then go talk to the client, if you're providing a high quality experience that meets their needs, fees rarely come up. And that's because you're providing value to them in a way that they won't be able to do it. And they understand that there is a fee for that. And so, we don't see people like lowering their fees. It's exactly what you said. I call it relative price compression. You're doing more today than you were yesterday. You'll do more tomorrow than you're doing today. And so, but if we enable that through technology, if we enable that through scaled process, I think we can continue to progress the value proposition. At some point, maybe you can't without significantly eroding margins. And then I think is an opportunity to be like, all right, look at, like, this is the value we're providing you. We may need to raise your fee, right? And we have seen firms actually raise fees, and receive very little, if any, pushback, as long as there's just like the story tied in with, here's the value we're providing. Here is the way we've progressed the value proposition the last 5-10 years. And in order to continue to invest in the business and have the great people we have on the team, we need to reassess the fee structure that we have. And I'm not saying that's like prevalent across the industry, but I have seen it, and I've seen it be pretty effective. The most common thing that we see people when they look at their fees and kind of the service and they weigh it against each other, is they rethink fees going forward for future clients. And I think it's a healthy thing to go evaluate where you are versus the industry. We help our firms do that within Hightower and the industry. And then, align that with the value proposition and the service, the value creating for your clients, and use it as like an energizing moment for the organization, to say you are creating a ton of value for your clients. And in order to keep doing that, new clients, we're not going to ask you to go reprice existing clients now, but going forward, new clients will be on the schedule, right? There will be a exceptions committee that you have to present to when you want to go off this fee schedule. And you're creating a barrier, But I think you also have to create the excitement around and reinforce the value that we are creating. There's a ton of value being created by these by these firms and by these advisors, and we should be proud of that value. And that value should be remunerated or paid for. And I think clients generally are.
Let's switch topics here for a moment and let's talk about M&A. And I know we could do a whole episode on that, but how do you see M&A evolving here in 2023 and beyond? What's the near term future look like for the M&A side of the business?
Yeah, it's interesting. I met with a prospect yesterday, and they asked a similar question, and it's all around like why would people do deals, or more people doing deals, and why. And I think it goes back to a large part of what we're talking about, which is the firms that are selling today, in many cases are bigger, are more well run than they ever have been. I think what they're doing, though, as a result of becoming a better or more well-run firm, is they're looking ahead and saying, wow, like that mountain that we're going to have to climb to maintain our independence is pretty high. And some firms are invigorated by that. They're like, yep, let's get after it. We're going to invest the cash flows of the business into it. We're going to hire the right people. We're going to bring in the right technology. We understand this is a 10, 20, 30-year build or more. But I think a lot of people are stepping back and saying, I love being kind of the strategic visionary of this business. I love working with clients. I like developing talent, but I don't actually get my self-worth from running all aspects of the business, making all decisions for the business. And so if there are partners out there that can help me achieve more of what I want for myself and for my team and for my clients, like why shouldn't I look at that? Especially in a competitive seller's market. There are a lot of people that are looking to do deals, and so valuations over historic valuations are up materially. And so I think when you can marry the idea of finding a partner that enables you to feel like you're winning for your team, for your clients, for yourself, I think it becomes a really compelling story for somebody to partner. I think we're no longer in the first or second inning of this. We're probably in the third, fourth inning, maybe probably third, fourth is kind of where I feel like we are. And I say because like in inning one or two, there's only a few buyers. You're really convincing people of why you would need to sell or they have to sell. Inning 3, 4, 5, there's more buyers. There's more value being created, both for the investors, but also for the clients, because we're starting to do more. And I think that's kind of like where we are. We're in this like sweet spot right now where people are seeing a tremendous amount of value being created for clients, for team members, because of the opportunities they'll have, and for the owners and shareholders of these businesses. So I think we're going to continue to run for a while. 23, it's interesting. 22 was up and down as you'd expect. I think we're now a year into this downturn, and I think people kind of like accepted it for what it is. And so they're coming back to, okay, well, if we want to do a transaction next year or 2 or 3, whatever it is, we should probably start meeting with people to make the most informed decision we can. So I think 23 is going to be very active. It started out at a sprint for us, and I think the reasoning and the rationale behind why it will continue is very strong. You still have the succession challenge, you still have the aging demographic, and now you add on that like firms are building real experiences and thinking about how to add more value to the clients and to the people that are serving the clients and as part of the organization. I think that's just a really powerful story that's going to build a lot of momentum that should continue.
Are you seeing deal structure change here in 2023 in light of higher interest rates and down markets? How's that looking?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to what type of firm you're talking about. The highest quality, high net new asset growing firms, think 10% plus net new assets, multi-generational business development. um, they haven't seen much impact, and I think that's probably because there just aren't many of them out there. I think where you are seeing some both structure and reduction in multiple is anything beyond the the most premium firm. And so I think you've seen multiples come back a bit. And I think you're also seeing not only multiples come back a bit, but more structure around retention or growth come into play. We went through a period of time where, like many industries, when you have a lot of new capital coming in the industry, when the market is only going up, everything looks great. And even going back to how you answer this conversation, it's like, hey, the business is growing 12% a year. That's great, right? And you can convince yourself that is growing and that is growth. But when you look under the hood, it's not. I mean, it benefited from a rising market. And so I think you're having more focus on the quality of the business now. And so, I think the higher quality business you are, the less impact I'll call it, farther away from the higher quality businesses you are, the more impact, which is a pretty, simple thing to say. But we went through a period of time where it wasn't that. Everything was priced pretty similarly, which was, I think frustrating from a person who does like to see the nuance of things and does differentiate in quality, or at least tries to.
Now, I know it's going to vary depending on a lot of different factors, but what are some ranges of multiples that you see? And I know one of the big factors is, like the size of the firm itself, how fast it's growing. But
Yep.
Can you give me any sense for what kind of multiples you're seeing out there of EBITDA?
Yeah, I think, smaller deals are kind of higher single digits, with growth, with retention. If they knock it out of the park, maybe they'll get into low double digits, depending on size and things like that. And for some firms, location is really important, or things like that. And then for when you get over $1 billion, you're probably talking double digits in terms of multiples. Again, mix of to your point, it is changing, but mix of upfront, some retention payments, and then growth payments. And I think that's one of the things that we really like. And it's like we have always have growth earnouts too, actually, and over extended periods of time, because if you're creating growth over an extended period of time, we all win. And so you should individually benefit from that, or not individually, but the seller should benefit from that as well. And so I think you'll see more retention, more growth structure in deals going forward.
All right. I want to wrap up with one final topic, another one that I'm sure we could spend a lot of time talking about, but artificial intelligence, AI, of course, has been in the news for a long time, but more recently, because of ChatGPT, there's been a lot of excitement out there about this natural language processing AI. So how do you guys think about AI in the advisory business? Is this an opportunity for advisors? Is this a threat to advisors? Is it both, depending on whether you're a good advisor or an average advisor? How do you guys think about it?
I think about it in two ways. One is data. So let's we can call it AI, but like AI is basically making decisions with well-informed and clean data. So it starts with, what data do you have as an organization? How do you manage that? How clean is it? And clean meaning like how consistently is it entered in the same manner, so you can truly leverage it as an organization. I think the firms that really focus on the quality of their data, using their data, and then putting AI on top of that are going to have an opportunity to win in a very significant way. How do I think it impacts the experience? I don't know. I mean, like on the specifics, I think what it does create is an opportunity very similar to what we were talking about, is, customization versus standardization. What is the real value? I think the opportunity in there is to say, what else can we do to take off our plates using data, AI, whatever comes out next, to get us closer to the client and the real value that we're creating for these clients. I don't think it's going to make an advisor, or make them extinct just because same way like when robo advisors came out, and it's like, we're going to do this cheaper, we're going to do this more efficient, and it's like they've had some success. But guess what? The independent RIA channel has continued to grow very well, both from a revenue growth perspective as well as just new firms coming into the industry, which is indicative of clients finding value in what they do. And so I think of it as, yes, it's a challenge if we don't face it, but it can also be turned into an opportunity for us as we learn to do core functions more efficiently to free us up to continue to extend kind of that last mile of the experience and the personalization of the experience.
Yeah, and I view it as it is a threat to the lower end advisor who doesn't want to keep up with technology, doesn't want to learn new things, doesn't want to integrate these types of things into the practice, because there are going to be lots of advisors who do. And the ones who do are the ones who are going to end up with the lion's share of the business. So I'm a big believer that every advisor, if you want to stay in this business for any amount of time going forward, you really have to embrace what's going on with these types of things, because other people are, firms like yours, you're going to be integrating this, and all the fintech providers in the industry are going to be integrating this stuff as well. So I think it's also going to elevate the requirements to be a financial advisor, meaning that a lot of this stuff with AI is, today, if you have like less than 250,000 in assets at a wirehouse, you're probably going to go to a call center. Well, in the future, you might be sent to an AI to have that conversation, who can handle it just as well as someone on the phone. So, we've got to embrace this stuff. We've got to figure out how can we incorporate this to extend our capabilities and our capacity. So again, we could talk about that forever, but I know we need to wrap up here. So Scott, this has been great. I appreciate it. Let me give you the last word here. Any final comment, and certainly let us know what's the best way for folks to connect with you.
Sure. So I appreciate the opportunity. I love these conversations. I think we're at a fascinating period of time for the industry. And I think as firms, as well as an industry, I think we need to really focus on the value we're creating. We're creating a tremendous amount of value, but it's not equal amongst firms, just like growth isn't equal amongst firms. And so, when you look ahead 5 or 10 years, how are you going to differentiate yourself? How are you going to stand out? And I think, we at Hightower and others of our competitors and many other firms are constantly thinking about where we can not only push the value proposition, but how do we articulate it so that people find it valuable? And so, I would encourage everybody to step back and say, I'm building a business, whether that business is 500,000 or 5 million or $50 million of revenue. And how do I take that 3x leap, that 10x leap, and what is going to be required, and who do I need on my side? That might be all employee base, that might be a partner. But I think this is an opportunity where those who think ahead and plan ahead and build ahead will continue to capture an outsized portion of the industry, and I think the pace of change is only going to accelerate. So I think we're at a fascinating point in time in this industry. I'd love to have this conversation again in a year, because I think it'll change, and it's a lot of fun as a result. But if you want to get in touch with Hightower, it's pretty easy. HightowerAdvisors.com. You can ask for myself or somebody on the M&A team. Happy to chat with you about the business. And then as part of our process, what we're selling is really Hightower at the end of the day, and the people that are part of Hightower. And so one of our favorite things to do when it's the right time is just to have you meet the team, have you meet firms as part of Hightower, because you get a sense of the experience that we provide to our firms, which I think is critical when you're making that decision.
All right. Well, Scott, thank you. Great conversation. Appreciate it. And I will probably take you up on that. We'll get together again here in a year and see how things have evolved. So I appreciate your time today.
That'd be great. I thank you for the opportunity.